Look at this house. It sits on land that shakes harder than almost anywhere on Earth. Thousands of earthquakes every single year. And the builders did something that sounds insane. They lifted the entire house off the ground and balanced it on wooden posts and loose stones. No bolts, no concrete, nothing holding it down. Everything you've been told about strong foundations says this should collapse in seconds. It doesn't. It outlasts modern concrete homes, and the reason exposes a costly mistake hiding under your own house. Comment float if this already broke something you believed about houses. I want to see who's paying attention. Now let me show you what that floating house is actually escaping from. To understand why a Japanese house hovers above the earth, you have to understand this. It isn't fighting one enemy. It's quietly defeating 4 at the same time, and every one of them is trying to destroy the building from a different direction. The first attacks from below, and you can't even see it coming. Enemy 1, water that rots a house from underneath. Japan is not rainy. Japan is drenched. Warm ocean air dumps moisture across the islands for months, and there's an entire season built around it, the tsuyu, the rainy season, when the air gets so thick you could almost drink it. Now here's the problem. Traditional Japanese homes were built almost entirely from wood, and wood pressed against wet soil is a death sentence. It rots, it grows mold. Insects burrow in and eat it alive from the inside. So the old builders did something brilliant. They raised the whole floor off the earth and left a gap of open air underneath. Wind flows through that gap, drying the timber from below, carrying the damp away before it can ever settle. The house breathes, and that same lifted design turned out to be the perfect answer to a far more terrifying enemy. Enemy 2, the ground that tries to shake the house apart. This is the part that should stop you. Japan sits on top of the most violent earthquake zone on the planet. So why would anyone perch a home on wooden posts above shaking ground? Because that's exactly what saves it. A modern house bolted rigidly into the earth has no choice. When the ground jerks, the building is forced to jerk with it, and rigid things under violent force crack and snap. The traditional Japanese house does the opposite. It rests on smooth foundation stones, a technique called ishibadate, without being fixed down. When the earth lurches, the stones move, but the house is allowed to slide and sway on top of them, absorbing the shock instead of fighting it. It's the same principle engineers now spend millions building into skyscrapers. Base isolation, letting a building float over the shaking rather than resist it. The old carpenters discovered it centuries ago, with nothing but stone and timber. Bend, don't break. And that flexibility hides in every joint of the house. If this is rewiring how you see strong building, subscribe. This channel is built on the quiet genius most people walk right past. Now, the enemy that arrives all at once. Enemy 3, water that comes for the whole village. The raised floor doesn't only fight slow, invisible damp. It fights the flood that arrives in an afternoon. Typhoons and swollen rivers can push water across low ground fast, and a house sitting flat on the soil becomes a bathtub, everything inside soaked and ruined. Lift that same house on posts, and the water passes underneath it. The living space stays dry above the surge, while the flood moves through the empty gap below and drains away. What looks like decoration, a house standing on legs, is actually a survival strategy for a country caught between the mountains and the sea. And the same gap solves one more problem: a smaller enemy with an appetite. Enemy 4, the tiny invaders that never stop. Termites and ground insects destroy more wooden homes than fire ever will. They travel through soil and climb straight up into anything touching the ground, eating the structure hollow from the inside while it still looks perfectly solid from the outside. By lifting the house into open air, the builders cut off the invader's easiest route in. The exposed underside means damage can be seen and dealt with early, instead of festering in a sealed, damp crawlspace. Add the constant airflow that keeps everything dry, and the whole design becomes hostile to the very things that eat wooden houses alive. 4 enemies: moisture, earthquakes, floods, and insects, all defeated by a single decision: don't touch the ground. Here's what makes this genius, and a little humbling. Western building instinct is to dominate nature, pour thicker concrete, bolt it down harder, force the structure to stand its ground and refuse to move. Japanese building did the opposite. It studied the water, the shaking, the seasons, and then designed a home that cooperates with them, that breathes, bends, and lets danger pass through, instead of standing rigid until it snaps. That's why modern engineers keep circling back to these old houses. The floating foundation, the airflow, the flexible joints. These weren't primitive compromises. They were centuries of observation turned into design. The mistake so many modern homes make is assuming strength means never moving. These houses prove the opposite. Real durability comes from knowing when to yield. So the house wasn't defying the ground out of madness. It was refusing to touch it out of wisdom, escaping the rot from below, the shaking beneath, the floods that rush through, and the insects that climb up. 4 enemies, 1 quietly brilliant answer. The next time something looks strange, ask what it survived to end up that way. Because that floating house isn't fragile. It's smarter than the ground it stands on. Tell me in the comments, which of the 4 surprised you most? The earthquakes, the floods, the rot, or the insects? And if you know someone obsessed with old architecture, send them this. They'll never look at a house the same way. The strongest thing a house can do isn't to stand rigid. It's to know exactly when to move.